How did a peasant from a remote Siberian village rise to the inner circle of Russian royalty? Rasputin's early life and rise to influence is a saga of spiritual ambition, uncanny charisma, and mysterious acts that defy explanation. The story of Grigory Rasputin begins in an isolated village in the depths of Siberia. Born in 1869 to peasant farmers, his early life was unremarkable, or so it seemed. Like many in his village, young Grigory was expected to live and die in obscurity. Yet even as a child there were signs that Rasputin was no ordinary boy. Legends claim he had an aura of mystery about him. When local villagers spoke of him, they often described his piercing, otherworldly eyes that seemed to see beyond what others could perceive. One story tells of Rasputin healing a horse that had fallen lame, act that some attributed to divine intervention. Others whispered that his behavior bordered on the supernatural, with bouts of strange visions and an uncanny ability to predict the future. But these whispers were countered by darker rumors. Some saw Rasputin as a troublemaker, a young man prone to drinking and petty crime. Others considered him a vagabond, wandering aimlessly rather than working the land as most young men were expected to do. His life might have continued on this unremarkable trajectory if not for a sudden and profound religious awakening. In his late 20s, Rasputin experienced what he described as a divine calling. The catalyst remains unclear. Some speculate it was guilt over his earlier misdeeds. Others believe he was driven by a desire for deeper meaning. Whatever the reason, Rasputin abandoned his family for a pilgrimage that would forever alter his life. He journeyed to monasteries and holy sites across Russia, immersing himself in the teachings of Orthodox Christianity. Among these experiences, one in particular stood out: his visit to the monastery at Verkhoturye. Here, Rasputin began to cultivate his own interpretation of faith, one that combined traditional Orthodox practices with more radical beliefs. Rasputin embraced the idea that sin and redemption were intertwined. To truly connect with God, he argued, one had to experience the depths of human weakness. This philosophy, unconventional and controversial, became the cornerstone of his spiritual identity. Over time, it would become both the source of his power and the seed of his downfall. Returning to Pokrovskoye, Rasputin began to attract followers. His charisma was undeniable, and his words seemed to carry an almost hypnotic power. To many, he was a healer, a seer, a man of God. Yet his methods were anything but traditional. He rejected the austere, rigid practices of the Orthodox Church, favoring a more personal and visceral approach to spirituality. Soon, Rasputin's reputation began to spread beyond his village. He gained the attention of influential religious figures in Kazan, a city on the Volga River. In Kazan, Rasputin encountered members of the Russian elite who were drawn to mysticism and the idea of spiritual enlightenment. Among them were bishops and noblewomen who viewed him as a living saint. By 1905, Rasputin's journey brought him to St. Petersburg, the imperial capital. This time, Russia was in turmoil. The failed revolution of 1905 had shaken the Romanov dynasty, and Tsar Nicholas II and his wife, Tsarina Alexandra, were increasingly isolated from their people. Alexandra, in particular, turned to spiritual advisors for solace. Rasputin's introduction to the Romanovs was orchestrated by influential church figures who believed his unique approach could benefit the royal family. When he first met the Tsar and Tsarina, Rasputin exuded an aura of humility and wisdom. He impressed them with his plain-spoken honesty and profound insights into human nature. The Romanovs, however, were not just looking for spiritual guidance, they were desperate for a miracle. Their son, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a condition that left him prone to life-threatening bleeding episodes. Traditional medicine had failed to provide relief, and Alexandra, deeply spiritual and superstitious, believed that divine intervention was their only hope. It was during one of Alexei's episodes that Rasputin's influence solidified. Called to the palace, he reportedly prayed over the boy, and to the astonishment of the royal family, Alexei's condition improved. Historians have debated the reasons behind this apparent miracle. Some attribute it to Rasputin's calming effect on the Tsarina, which reduced her anxiety and indirectly benefited Alexei. Others point to the placebo effect or coincidence. Regardless of the explanation, the Romanovs were convinced. To Alexandra, Rasputin was not merely a healer, he was a savior sent by God. Over time, Rasputin became a trusted confidant, offering advice not only on spiritual matters, but also on political decisions. Yet Rasputin's rise was not without controversy. His presence at court drew suspicion from the nobility and clergy, who viewed him as a manipulative charlatan. Stories of his debauchery, wild parties, affairs with noblewomen, and excessive drinking circulated in whispers throughout St. Petersburg. To his detractors, Rasputin was a threat to the sanctity of the Romanov dynasty and the stability of the empire itself. Despite these rumors, Rasputin maintained his hold over the royal family. His uncanny ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics and his inexplicable influence over the Tsarina ensured his place at the heart of Russian power. But as his influence grew, so did the resentment of those who viewed him as an interloper. By 1910, Rasputin had become a symbol of everything wrong with the Romanov regime. To the Russian people, he embodied the corruption and decadence of a monarchy out of touch with its subjects. For the aristocracy, he was a dangerous upstart who wielded too much power. The stage was set for the next chapter in Rasputin's life, a chapter defined by intrigue, betrayal, and the inexorable march toward his dramatic downfall. Rasputin's relationship with the Romanov family became a cornerstone of his influence, fueled by his apparent ability to heal the heir to the throne. But was this power rooted in mysticism, manipulation, or mere coincidence? To understand Rasputin's enduring power over the Romanovs, we must first examine the profound fear and desperation that consumed Tsarina Alexandra. In the gilded halls of the Winter Palace, Alexandra bore the crushing weight of an unbearable secret. Her son, Alexei, the future Tsar, suffered from hemophilia, a genetic condition that left him vulnerable to uncontrolled bleeding from the slightest injury. For Alexandra, each scrape, bruise, or bump carried the specter of death. The palace, physicians, despite their education and experience, could offer no cure. The shadow of mortality loomed over her son, and with it, the fate of the Romanov dynasty. It was this desperate yearning for hope that led Alexandra to place her faith in a man from the unlikeliest of places, a Siberian mystic named Rasputin. Rasputin's healing powers first became evident during one of Alexei's most dire episodes. In 1907, after a minor fall left the boy bedridden with excruciating pain, the court physicians declared that little could be done. As Alexei's condition worsened, Alexandra summoned Rasputin, who was by then a trusted spiritual advisor to the family. When Rasputin arrived, he reportedly knelt by Alexei's bedside and prayed. What happened next is a matter of both historical record and intense debate. Within hours of Rasputin's intervention, Alexei's bleeding stopped, and his condition improved dramatically. To Alexandra, this was nothing short of a miracle. From that moment, she became Rasputin's most ardent supporter, convinced that his connection to the divine was the only thing keeping her son alive. But was Rasputin's power truly supernatural? Some historians suggest that his calming presence had a psychosomatic effect on Alexandra, who in turn became less anxious around Alexei. This reduction in stress could have slowed the boy's bleeding, as anxiety often exacerbates symptoms in hemophiliacs. Others argue that Rasputin may have inadvertently improved Alexei's condition by discouraging the use of aspirin, a common treatment at the time, but one that worsens bleeding. Whatever the cause, the Romanovs were convinced of Rasputin's abilities. To them, he was more than a healer, he was a lifeline. Alexandra, in particular, became fiercely protective of him, dismissing any criticism as jealousy or slander. This unwavering faith in Rasputin would have profound consequences. As his influence grew, so too did the resentment of the Russian nobility and clergy. To them, Rasputin's presence at court was an affront to tradition and a dangerous distraction from the pressing political issues of the day. Yet Rasputin's connection to the Romanovs was not solely based on his purported healing powers. He possessed an uncanny ability to read people, particularly those in positions of power. When speaking with Alexandra, he projected humility and reverence, always addressing her as Mama in a tone that suggested both affection and deference. With Nicholas II, he took a more direct approach, offering advice on matters of state with the air of a man who saw the world more clearly than others. This duality, at once subservient and authoritative, allowed Rasputin to navigate the intricacies of court life with remarkable skill. He understood the insecurities of the Tsar and Tsarina and used them to his advantage. For Alexandra, who felt isolated and mistrusted by the Russian aristocracy, Rasputin's loyalty was a balm. For Nicholas, who struggled with indecision, Rasputin's confidence was a source of reassurance. But Rasputin's influence was not without its costs. His behavior outside the palace often stood in stark contrast to the image he cultivated within it. Tales of drunken debauchery, lewd behavior, and scandalous affairs began to circulate throughout St. Petersburg. To his detractors, these stories confirmed what they had always suspected, that Rasputin was a fraud, exploiting the Romanovs for his own gain. The Russian press seized upon these rumors, portraying Rasputin as a corrupting force at the heart of the empire. Cartoons and editorials depicted him as a puppet master, controlling the Tsarina and, through her, the Tsar. The aristocracy, already wary of Rasputin's influence, saw these scandals as proof that he needed to be removed from court by any means necessary. Despite the growing backlash, Alexandra remained steadfast in her support of Rasputin. She dismissed the rumors as baseless attacks fueled by envy and malice. To her, Rasputin's detractors were blind to his divine purpose. This unwavering loyalty deepened the rift between the Romanovs and the nobility, further isolating the imperial family at a time when they desperately needed allies. By 1912, Rasputin's role as Alexei's healer and the Tsarina's confidant was firmly established. His presence at court was both a source of comfort for the Romanovs and a lightning rod for controversy. Each time Alexei suffered a bleeding episode, Rasputin was summoned, and each time, his intervention seemed to work. This cycle of crisis and recovery only solidified his place in the Romanovs' lives, even as it fueled the animosity of those who saw him as a charlatan. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Rasputin's growing arrogance and erratic behavior alienated even some of his closest allies. His belief in his own invincibility, bolstered by the Romanovs' unwavering faith, led him to take greater risks and make more enemies. The myth of Rasputin the healer was both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. It was the foundation of his influence, the reason the Romanovs clung to him so desperately. Yet it was also the source of the resentment and suspicion that would ultimately lead to his downfall. As the tensions surrounding Rasputin reached a boiling point, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the Romanov dynasty to its core. The healer, once seen as a savior, was now viewed by many as a dangerous force, a man whose power could no longer be tolerated. Rasputin's influence over the Romanovs was matched only by his ability to court scandal. Beneath his mystic image lay a man whose behavior shocked even the most decadent circles of St. Petersburg, fueling public outrage and heightening his enemies' resolve. The Rasputin the Romanovs knew was a healer, a spiritual guide, and a trusted confidant. But outside the palace walls, another Rasputin emerged, a man whose actions seemed to contradict the holiness he claimed. This dichotomy between saint and sinner became the focal point of growing public and political disdain for his presence at court. St. Petersburg at the turn of the 20th century was a city of contradictions. The glittering facade of the imperial capital masked a society riddled with inequality and unrest. In this setting, Rasputin's behavior stood out as a symbol of excess and hypocrisy. While the nobility whispered of his exploits in private, the burgeoning press took those whispers and amplified them into scandals that spread like wildfire. At the heart of Rasputin's infamy was his unabashed indulgence in vices that shocked the very aristocracy that had initially welcomed him. Accounts of wild parties, heavy drinking, and inappropriate relationships began to circulate, painting a picture of a man unbound by conventional morality. His philosophy of redemption through sin, a belief that one must fall into temptation to truly experience divine grace, offered a convenient justification for his excesses. One of the most notorious venues for Rasputin's debauchery was the aristocratic salons of St. Petersburg. These gatherings, held by noblewomen enamored with mysticism, often devolved into orgiastic celebrations fueled by Rasputin's magnetic presence. Women from all walks of life, drawn by his reputation as a healer and holy man, sought his counsel and often more. To his critics, these encounters were proof of his manipulative nature, a man who preyed on the vulnerable under the guise of spirituality. Yet Rasputin's influence wasn't limited to private rooms. In public, he exuded a raw charisma that made him impossible to ignore. With his unkempt beard, piercing eyes, and tattered robes, he cut an imposing figure that stood in stark contrast to the polished nobility around him. His presence in the streets of St. Petersburg, often in the company of questionable characters, added to his mystique and notoriety. The press capitalized on this image, publishing lurid tales that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Cartoons depicted Rasputin as a puppet master, pulling the strings of the Tsarina, and, by extension, the empire. Editorials accused him of undermining the moral fabric of Russian society. Some accounts were exaggerated or entirely fabricated, but they resonated with a population eager to find a scapegoat for the nation's mounting problems. The Russian Orthodox Church, initially divided on Rasputin, began to distance itself as the scandals grew. High-ranking clergy who had once supported him now viewed him as a threat to the Church's credibility. In 1911, the Bishop of Saratov denounced Rasputin publicly, describing him as a mad monk who had brought disgrace to the faith. This denunciation, while damaging, did little to curtail Rasputin's influence over the Romanovs. For Alexandra, the accusations against Rasputin only deepened her resolve to protect him. She dismissed the rumors as baseless attacks orchestrated by those jealous of his divine gifts. To her, Rasputin's detractors were blind to his true nature, unable to see the good he brought into their lives. This unwavering loyalty only widened the gulf between the Romanovs and the Russian elite, leaving the imperial family increasingly isolated. Among the aristocracy, resentment toward Rasputin reached a fever pitch. His presence at court was seen as a humiliation, a symbol of the Tsarina's poor judgment and the Tsar's inability to assert control. The scandals surrounding Rasputin provided his enemies with ammunition to challenge the Romanovs' legitimacy. Whispers of treachery began to circulate, with some suggesting that Rasputin's influence extended to state secrets and military decisions. The scandals also gave rise to a darker conspiracy that Rasputin was working to undermine Russia from within. Some claimed he was a German agent, manipulating the Romanovs to weaken the empire during a time of war. These accusations, though unfounded, reflected the growing paranoia of a society on the brink of collapse. But Rasputin was not without his defenders. To his followers, the scandals were merely proof of his humanity. They argued that his imperfections made him more relatable, a man who understood the struggles of ordinary people. This perspective endeared him to some segments of the population, particularly those disillusioned with the hypocrisy of the nobility and clergy. Yet even Rasputin's supporters could not deny the damage his behavior inflicted on the Romanov's reputation. As the scandals grew, so did calls for his removal. Members of the imperial court, once tolerant of his eccentricities, began to plot against him. For them, Rasputin was not just a personal affront but a political liability, a symbol of everything wrong with the Romanov regime. By 1914, the tension surrounding Rasputin had reached a breaking point. His double life as a holy man and hedonist had alienated nearly every segment of Russian society, save for the Romanovs themselves. His enemies, emboldened by public outrage, began to consider more drastic measures to rid the empire of his influence. Yet Rasputin remained defiant. He dismissed his critics with the same confidence that had carried him from a Siberian village to the Winter Palace. To those who sought his downfall, he issued a chilling prophecy. If I die or you desert me, you will lose your son and your crown within 6 months. This prophecy, whether born of genuine foresight or calculated manipulation, would haunt the Romanovs in the years to come. For now, it served as a stark reminder of the stakes at play. Rasputin's survival was not just a matter of personal ambition, it was tied to the fate of an empire on the brink of collapse. As his enemies closed in, Rasputin's world became a precarious balance of influence and scandal. Each new allegation further eroded his standing, even as his hold on the Romanovs remained unshaken. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not only his fate but the future of the Russian Empire itself. As Rasputin's influence over the Romanovs grew, so did the resolve of his enemies. Disparate factions of Russian society converged on a singular goal: to eliminate the man they believed was destroying the empire. By 1916, Rasputin's presence in the imperial court had become a symbol of everything wrong with the Romanov regime. For Russia's nobles, military leaders, and clergy, he was not just an embarrassment, he was a threat to the very survival of the empire. Amid the chaos of World War I, with Russian troops suffering catastrophic losses on the front lines and unrest simmering among the population, Rasputin became the scapegoat for all of the nation's woes. The Tsar's decision to take command of the army left Tsarina Alexandra in control of domestic affairs, a role she was neither trained nor equipped to handle. Under Rasputin's guidance, Alexandra dismissed capable ministers and replaced them with sycophants who shared her blind loyalty to the mystic. This further isolated the Romanovs from the nobility and intensified calls for Rasputin's removal. The conspirators against Rasputin came from varied backgrounds, united only by their shared disdain for the Siberian mystic. At the heart of the plot was Prince Felix Yusupov, one of Russia's wealthiest and most flamboyant nobles. Yusupov had long detested Rasputin, viewing him as a corrupting force on the Romanovs and a disgrace to Russian society. Joining him was Vladimir Purishkevich, an outspoken member of the Duma who had publicly denounced Rasputin as a charlatan. Also involved was Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a member of the imperial family who saw Rasputin as a stain on the Romanov name. These men, though powerful in their own right, faced a significant obstacle: Rasputin's uncanny ability to survive both figurative and literal attacks. On one occasion, he was nearly fatally stabbed by a woman claiming to be on a divine mission to kill him. Despite suffering grievous wounds, Rasputin recovered, a testament to his resilience and a source of renewed awe among his followers. This event only deepened the mystique surrounding him, as though he were shielded by divine protection. For Yusupov and his co-conspirators, however, Rasputin's survival was not proof of his sanctity but rather an infuriating reminder of their failure to rid Russia of his influence. They concluded that if Rasputin could not be discredited or frightened into exile, he would have to be eliminated by more drastic means. The plan was meticulously crafted, a blend of guile, audacity, and sheer determination. Yusupov offered himself as the bait, inviting Rasputin to his palace under the pretense of a private gathering. The prince knew of Rasputin's penchant for indulgence and crafted an irresistible lure: food, drink, and the promise of an intimate evening. On the night of December 29th, 1916, Rasputin arrived at the Yusupov Palace on the Moika River, unaware that the evening would be his last. The conspirators prepared the basement dining room for the grisly task ahead. Plates of pastries and glasses of wine were laced with cyanide, their lethal doses calculated to ensure quick and certain death. Yusupov, ever the actor, played the gracious host, masking his nervousness with charm. Rasputin, however, seemed unfazed. As the evening progressed, he consumed the poisoned wine and pastries with apparent relish, yet showed no signs of distress. Yusupov, watching in disbelief, began to question whether the poison had lost its potency or whether Rasputin's reputed supernatural resilience was at play. Panicked and desperate, Yusupov excused himself and consulted with his co-conspirators. They decided to take a more direct approach. Returning to the basement, Yusupov retrieved a revolver and, feigning calm, raised it toward Rasputin. With a single shot, the mystic collapsed, blood pooling around his prone body. Believing the deed was done, Yusupov called the others to examine the body. But as they discussed their next steps, Rasputin stirred. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged at Yusupov, his piercing eyes filled with rage and desperation. The sight was so terrifying that Yusupov reportedly fled the room in panic. Rasputin, injured but alive, staggered out of the palace and into the snow-covered courtyard. The conspirators, realizing their plan was unraveling, pursued him. Purishkevich fired multiple shots, one of which struck Rasputin in the back. Still, the mystic clung to life, crawling toward the river as though drawn by an unseen force. Finally, the conspirators subdued Rasputin and bound his body. They carried him to the nearby Neva River, where they cast him into the icy waters. The river, with its freezing currents and crushing cold, was meant to be Rasputin's final resting place, a fitting end to a man whose life defied explanation. But even in death, Rasputin's legend grew. When his body was discovered days later, an autopsy revealed water in his lungs, suggesting he had been alive when he entered the river. To his followers, this was proof of his divine resilience. To his enemies, it was a chilling reminder of the lengths required to silence him. The assassination of Rasputin marked a turning point not only for the Romanovs but for Russia as a whole. His death removed a polarizing figure from the imperial court but did little to stem the tide of revolution sweeping the nation. Within months, the Romanovs would lose their throne, and the Russian Empire would collapse into chaos. For Yusupov and his co-conspirators, the killing of Rasputin was both a victory and a curse. Though they had succeeded in their mission, they had also unleashed a series of events that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Rasputin's prophecy that his death would herald the end of the Romanovs proved eerily prescient, cementing his place in history as one of its most enigmatic and controversial figures. Rasputin's ominous prophecy of doom for the Romanovs came true in the wake of his assassination, as the Russian Empire crumbled under the weight of war, revolution, and internal betrayal. On the bitterly cold morning of December 30th, 1916, news of Rasputin's murder began to spread. For some, it was a moment of relief, the symbolic end of a malign influence over the Romanovs. For others, particularly Tsarina Alexandra, it was a tragedy, a profound loss that left her devastated and unmoored. Yet for all, Rasputin's death marked a turning point. The empire he had tethered himself to was unraveling, and the forces of revolution, long simmering beneath the surface, began to boil over. Before his death, Rasputin had issued a chilling prophecy. If he were killed by the nobility, the Romanov dynasty would fall, and within 2 years, the entire imperial family would be dead. His words had been dismissed by some as melodramatic or manipulative, but to Alexandra, they carried the weight of divine truth. As she mourned his death, she could not shake the ominous sense that his prophecy was already set in motion. The Romanov dynasty, once the embodiment of Russian imperial power, was crumbling. from within. By 1916, Tsar Nicholas II's decision to take direct command of the military had proven disastrous. The war effort was faltering, with Russian troops suffering massive losses against German forces. The Tsar's absence from the capital left Alexandra in charge, a role for which she was ill-prepared and widely distrusted. Under Rasputin's influence, Alexandra had replaced competent ministers with sycophants and outsiders, alienating the aristocracy and deepening the divide between the monarchy and the people. With Rasputin gone, her reliance on her own instincts only worsened the situation. To many, she became a symbol of the monarchy's failures, an empress blinded by loyalty to a man who had brought disgrace to the throne. But the problems facing the Romanovs extended far beyond the palace walls. The Russian people, battered by years of war and economic hardship, were losing faith in their rulers. Food shortages, inflation, and political unrest created a volatile atmosphere in cities across the empire. The capital, St. Petersburg, was a tinderbox, with strikes and protests becoming increasingly common. In March 1917, the tension reached a breaking point. Mass demonstrations erupted in St. Petersburg, fueled by widespread anger over food shortages and government mismanagement. The protests quickly grew into a full-scale uprising, with soldiers mutinying and workers seizing control of factories. The Tsar, returning from the front, found himself powerless to quell the rebellion. On March 15, 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne, ending more than 3 centuries of Romanov rule. The dynasty that had once ruled over one of the largest empires in history was now a relic of the past. A provisional government was established, but it struggled to maintain order in a nation teetering on the brink of collapse. The Romanovs were placed under house arrest, first in the Alexander Palace and later in the remote town of Tobolsk. Stripped of their titles and power, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children became prisoners in their own country. The opulence and grandeur of their former lives were replaced with the bleak reality of confinement and uncertainty. As the months passed, Rasputin's prophecy loomed large in the minds of the Romanovs. Alexandra, in particular, remained haunted by his words. In her letters, she expressed both grief over his death and a growing sense of foreboding about her family's fate. He warned us, she wrote, and we did not heed his voice. Now we must bear the consequences. The final chapter of the Romanov story came in July 1918. By this time, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, had seized power in the October Revolution. Viewing the Romanovs as a potential rallying point for counter-revolutionary forces, the Bolsheviks decided to eliminate the imperial family once and for all. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 5 children, and 4 loyal attendants were led to the basement of the Ipatiev house in Ekaterinburg. They were told they were being moved for their safety, but the truth was far grimmer. A Bolshevik firing squad awaited them, armed and ready to carry out the grim orders. The Romanovs were given no opportunity to plead for their lives. The execution was brutal and chaotic, with bullets ricocheting off walls and victims writhing in pain. By the time it was over, the Romanov dynasty was no more. The bodies were hastily buried in unmarked graves, their final resting place concealed for decades. News of the Romanovs' execution sent shockwaves around the world. For those who had opposed the monarchy, it was a decisive end to an era of oppression and inequality. For others, it was a tragic and unnecessary loss, a grim reminder of the violence unleashed by revolution. In the aftermath, Rasputin's prophecy took on an almost mythical quality. To those who had known him, it was further proof of his mystical foresight. His death, they argued, had been the catalyst for the Romanovs' downfall, fulfilling his warning with chilling accuracy. But was it truly prophecy, or merely a reflection of the forces already at play? Historians have debated this question for decades, examining whether Rasputin's influence had hastened the Romanovs' collapse, or if it was merely a symptom of deeper systemic failures. In either case, Rasputin's words cemented his legacy as one of history's most enigmatic figures. His life and death were inextricably linked to the fate of the Romanovs, his story a microcosm of an empire on the brink. As the dust settled on the ruins of the Russian Empire, the legend of Rasputin lived on. To some, he was a villain who had manipulated and betrayed the Romanovs. To others, he was a martyr, a man whose warnings had been ignored at great cost. But to all, he remained a symbol of the mysterious and the inexplicable, a man whose story continues to captivate and confound. Long after his death, Rasputin's name remains synonymous with mysticism, manipulation, and power. His story, a blend of historical fact and legend, continues to intrigue and influence culture, symbolizing the fragility of empires and the enduring allure of the enigmatic. Though Rasputin's physical presence ended in the icy waters of the Neva River, his legacy proved unshakable. His name, larger than life, transcended the turbulent collapse of the Russian Empire to become a symbol of mysticism, manipulation, and scandal. Today, Rasputin's story is a cultural phenomenon, straddling the line between historical reality and mythological fantasy. The immediate aftermath of Rasputin's death saw his image weaponized by nearly every faction in Russia's fractured society. To the Bolsheviks, he was a cautionary tale, a figure whose influence represented the decadence and incompetence of the Romanovs. For exiled monarchists, he became a scapegoat, a man whose presence at court tarnished the dynasty's reputation and alienated their subjects. In both narratives, Rasputin was more than a man. He was a symbol of everything wrong with pre-revolutionary Russia. But Rasputin's legacy was not confined to political discourse. In the years following his death, rumors and exaggerations took on a life of their own, turning him into a figure of almost supernatural proportions. Tales of his unkillable nature became central to his legend. The story of his assassination, poison, gunfire, and drowning grew with each retelling, transforming a desperate plot into a near-mythical battle between good and evil. These stories, sensationalized by newspapers and memoirs, captured the imagination of people far beyond Russia's borders. In Europe and America, Rasputin became a subject of fascination, a character in the broader drama of the Russian Revolution. To a world grappling with the aftermath of World War I, his story offered a compelling mix of intrigue, danger, and moral lessons. As the decades passed, Rasputin's image evolved further. In literature, he became a character of almost Shakespearean complexity, simultaneously villain and victim, a man of deep contradictions. Novels, plays, and poems explored his life and influence, often blending fact with fiction to create compelling narratives. In film, Rasputin became an enduring archetype. Early depictions, such as Rasputin and the Empress, 1932, painted him as a menacing figure, wielding dark powers over the Romanovs. Later adaptations, like Nicholas and Alexandra, 1971, presented a more nuanced view, highlighting his human flaws and the societal forces that shaped his rise and fall. These portrayals, while dramatized, solidified his place in popular culture as one of history's most enigmatic figures. Music, too, embraced the legend of Rasputin. In the 1970s, the disco hit Rasputin by Boney M turned his story into a dance floor anthem, its lyrics capturing both the mystique and the scandal of his life. The song, with its infectious beat and larger-than-life storytelling, introduced Rasputin to a new generation, ensuring his legacy would endure in unexpected ways. But beyond the entertainment world, Rasputin's story has deeper implications. Historians continue to debate his role in the fall of the Romanovs, questioning whether he was a catalyst for their downfall or merely a symptom of their already crumbling reign. His influence, while undeniable, remains difficult to quantify, shrouded in the same ambiguity that defined his life. Psychologists and sociologists have also examined Rasputin's legacy, viewing him as a case study in charisma and power dynamics. His ability to command loyalty from both peasants and royalty speaks to the universal appeal of figures who embody mystery and authority. Rasputin's story highlights how belief and perception can wield as much power as tangible action, a lesson that resonates in politics and leadership to this day. For spiritual thinkers, Rasputin's life offers a meditation on the complexities of faith and morality. Was he a man of God, genuinely seeking to bring healing and hope to those in need? Or was he a manipulator, using the guise of spirituality to satisfy his own desires? The truth, like much of Rasputin's story, likely lies somewhere in between. Rasputin's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of empires and the dangers of unchecked influence. His rise and fall mirror the larger trajectory of the Romanov dynasty, a period marked by grandeur, excess, and eventual collapse. To this day, Rasputin's life is a reminder of how personal relationships and private decisions can have far-reaching consequences in the public sphere. In modern Russia, Rasputin's legacy remains contested. Some view him as a tragic figure, misunderstood and maligned by history. Others see him as a symbol of corruption and decadence, a reminder of the dangers of placing too much power in the hands of one individual. Despite these differing perspectives, his story continues to captivate, offering insights into Russia's past and its ongoing struggles with identity and power. Rasputin's mystique endures because it taps into something universal, our fascination with the unknown. He was a man of contradictions, humble yet ambitious, spiritual yet indulgent, revered yet reviled. These contradictions make him more than a historical figure. They make him a lens through which we explore the complexities of human nature. And so, over a century after his death, Rasputin lives on, not just in books, films, and songs, but in our collective imagination. His story, equal parts history and myth, reminds us of the thin line between reality and legend. In the end, perhaps that is Rasputin's greatest legacy, a life that continues to defy explanation, leaving us forever intrigued, questioning, and searching for the truth.